Welcome, everybody who's joined us today for our webinar. And we will be getting started in just a couple of minutes. Hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully you can find the chat window. We will be using either the chat window or the Q&A window today to answer any questions you have along the way. So welcome, and we'll be getting started soon. Special welcome to a couple of friends. Ann Budison, who is an amazing school principal as well as an amazing parent. She is a principal at Glenwood Academy here in Illinois and does an amazing job. And Patty Cates is another name that I'm recognizing. Patty has been working with us, and I remember some other names as well. But welcome to everybody. Well, it's noon in Chicago, at least according to my phone. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, welcome to everybody. I'm Betsy Hill, president of Brainware Learning Company. We are recording our webinar today, so we will be sending a link and posting it on our website. So if you know of somebody who you think would enjoy benefit from watching it, you will be able to share it with them. Also, Karen has posted a copy of the slides or a link to the slides in the chat window. So you can click on that link, or you can use your most modern technology. And there's a QR code on this page, which will allow you to download the slides. What I want to do before we get too far down the road here, though, is just learn a little bit about who's participating today. So hopefully the poll has popped up for you, and I'd love to know if you're a parent, an educator, both, or somebody else. You might be a researcher, you might be a clinician, you might be, well, clinicians are often considered themselves educators. So okay. So I'm going to end the poll, and it looks like we have some parents, some educators, and many who are both. So I'll just share that result so that you can see it as well. So I will try to walk down two paths today, the educator and the parent path. So if I miss something, please feel free to jump in because we've got quite an array of different backgrounds here. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about cognitive skills. I'm guessing that since we set this up, most of you are somewhat familiar with cognitive skills, so I'm not going to talk about it in tremendous depth today, but I'll provide some resources, and there are also a ton of resources and information on our website at mybrainware.com that you can take a look at if you want to delve more deeply into what these are and all that kind of thing. We're going to talk a little bit about cognitive training because it's cognitive training that's comprehensive and integrated that really can have an impact on weaker cognitive skills. And we'll take a little look at that. And I'm very excited to be able to share this data that I'm going to share today. It's the first time that we've presented this. We've done many studies, including with Ann Budison at Glenwood, where we've looked at the impact on students in schools. But this is one where we have worked directly with each of these 109 students, and we continue to add more students to this all the time. But once we had gotten to the point where we had over 100, I really thought it was a great time to share that. So just a couple of very basics. Cognitive skills are mental processes. They're the ways that our brains take in information, organize it, store it, retrieve it. It's how we learn. It's not the what we learn, but the how. These are the processes that enable us to be effective learners. And they're also how we think. So our reasoning skills and all that kind of thing are part of cognitive skills. And when we are thinking about assessing and then developing cognitive skills, we have a number of categories that we group them into. And the QR code on the top right will take you to the page on our website that lists the 43 cognitive skills that we work on and has the definition of each of them. So what I have on this slide is really just a sort of a summarized list to give everybody a little bit of an idea. So we're looking at and thinking about our skills that include various attention skills. We tend to think about attention as being one thing, but can I stay focused? Can I stay on task? And that's sustained attention. But another aspect of attention is whether I can screen out distractions, whether I can go back and forth efficiently between, different activities. Another really important part of learning is our ability to process visual information. Here, skills like visual span, which is how much information we can take in at a glance, visualization, our ability to see something that's not directly in front of us. So if I ask you to think of a purple elephant in a yellow tutu, you could actually probably imagine that, maybe even draw a picture of it, because we can create that visual image even though it's not real. And we can remember visual information as well that we have actually seen. Figure ground is what allows us to distinguish an object from its background. Auditory processing, when we get to the auditory parallels to visual processing, things like being able to discriminate, hear the difference between a B and a P, or other kinds of sounds that may be very close and very similar. Sequential processing, making sure that we keep the information in the right order as our brains are processing it. Sensory integration is what helps all of that come together. We have to integrate visual and auditory information, sometimes kinesthetic information as well. Eye-hand coordination, timing, and rhythm all fall into this category. Memory includes everything from very, very short-term sensory memory to longer term. And also, one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about today is the difference between verbal memory and visual memory. Our brains remember information where we process it. So it's not that these are different processes, but it does turn out that some students, some children, some of us, for that matter, have one aspect of memory, either verbal or visual, that is stronger than the other. Executive functions. If you're an educator, you've been hearing that term a lot, although you may think of it mostly as self-regulation, whereas executive functions are three cognitive processes: working memory, so that's how we hold information in our mind while we think about it; inhibitory control, which is how we stop ourselves from doing something we otherwise would do. So that's the one that's the most closest and the most aligned with self-regulation. And then cognitive flexibility, our ability to shift gears, to think in different ways, to look at things from different perspectives. And those are the directive capacities of our mind, executive functions. And then we get into the kinds of thinking that we are increasingly encouraging students to do in school and in everyday life. Our ability to think and reason and solve problems, to plan, to think critically, to think strategically. All of these kinds of skills fall into either the logic and reasoning or the higher order executive functions category. So these are the kinds of skills that we are talking about today. And once again, that QR code will take you to a list on our website, which has definitions of each of these. Now, this is a slide that I include because I want to make the point that these skills do not operate in isolation. They don't operate separately from each other. They all have to work together, sort of like a spider web. So they're all connected. They all have connections. Of course, our brains are a little sturdier than a typical spider web, but this makes the point, hopefully, that our attention skills and our memory skills and our logic and reasoning skills, they all come together and serve us in whatever activities we engage in. And when we're engaging, whether it's math or whether it's reading or whether it's some other aspect of the curriculum or whether it's behavior, whether it's everyday life, whether it's having a conversation with a friend, all of these skills come into play and work together. So one of the things that we know now is that we can actually strengthen cognitive skills with the right kind of comprehensive integrated cognitive training. Our program is called Brainware Safari. I think that probably a lot of you on this call are familiar with the program, have heard of it. If anybody has not and is interested in taking a little quick tour of the program, we can do that at the end of the webinar, or we can schedule a time. I'd be happy to do that. Works on 43 cognitive skills, as I said, in this very integrated way, the way that our brains work. And what we want to see to have this kind of impact, significant impact, is using the program 3 to 5 times per week for 30 to 45 minutes over about 12 to 14 weeks. That doesn't mean that someone will have maxed out their ability to improve their learning capacity. But when we see this kind of usage, we are very confident that we will see some significant cognitive growth. And we're going to take a look at some examples of that. And one of the ways we do this is with a cognitive assessment. So we can look at the impact of performance on a scientifically valid, nationally normed cognitive assessment that's done before and after cognitive training to be able to look at this impact. We're not going to assess 43 cognitive skills. It's very hard to piece some of them apart, but we can look at some very key skills and allows us to do a couple of things. One of which is that it lets us understand what kind of learner somebody is. It lets us understand their strengths and their weaknesses, their cognitive profile, if you will. And it helps us then support them with the right kind of learning supports, with the right kinds of strategies. We can help them be empowered really to use their strengths to be more efficient learners because they are using their strengths. But we're also going to learn about their weaknesses, and everybody has cognitive strengths and weaknesses. Nobody's strong in everything. Nobody's weak in everything. What we are going to find out is that everybody has this very, really a unique cognitive profile that is different. No one falls in the middle either on everything. So we could have a lot of strengths and a lot of weaknesses in different areas. So I'm going to do one other little poll here, and I want you to think about these skills. So we have on the left, you have reasoning skills. Spatial perception is physically where things are in space. I call this the parallel parking skill for adults. I think we're all adults here on this, so you can think of that. Abstract reasoning is nonverbal reasoning, seeing patterns, being able to form concepts, similarities and differences, cause and effect, that kind of thing. Verbal reasoning is reasoning with verbal information, which we ask kids to do a lot in school. Memory skills, we talked about the fact that some people have stronger memory for information that's an image, a chart, a graph, a diagram, something visual, versus verbal memory, which is memory for something that we read or hear. It's language-based. The executive functions in the assessment that we do, attention is one of the executive functions. It has a lot in common with inhibitory control, so it has some aspects of that incorporated there. And then working memory and flexible thinking. And then it will also assess visual motor speed and overall processing speed, which is calculated from performance on all of these. And if you think about these skills and think about what it's like to have a strong skill or a weak skill, we can probably think about that pretty well in terms of our own intuitions about what we do well. Of course, we can assess them officially and scientifically and know that, but we also can probably have a pretty good idea what we're good at and what might be a little bit more of a struggle. So I've listed everything except the speed things, all the different skills here: abstract reasoning, spatial perception, verbal reasoning. And I'm going to ask you to think about what you think your cognitive strengths and weaknesses are. So this first one is what do you think is your strongest skill? And so we've got people choosing them. It's not quite a list here. It's 8, I think. So it might take everybody just a minute to think about it. Let's give everybody another minute or so. Oh, and then you can go ahead. Did I put that in here too? So the first question is, what is your strongest skill? And then what do you think maybe is your weakest skill? We're still getting some answers, so I'll wait just another little moment here. Okay, so it looks like the responses have slowed down. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And then I'm going to share the results. And so we have a whole bunch of very different learners in this group, which is not surprising because we pretty much have it in every group. It's very interesting that in terms of the strongest skills, people tended to go for memory skills or one of the reasoning skills, particularly verbal reasoning. And that's not surprising. Verbal reasoning is something that educators in particular are often very strong at. We put a lot of emphasis on verbal reasoning in school, and teachers are often those who did school well when they were students, and so have developed that. Interesting, a lot of with visual memory, and also interesting that nobody selected attention or working memory. So those are skills that I think everybody realizes can be quite challenging. Weakest, we get again a whole bunch of answers here, and verbal memory, it looks like it's the number one, and spatial perception is another one. So my strongest skill, I think the last time I took the assessment, it was abstract reasoning. And then my weakest is probably spatial perception. And when we know that, we can use that information to use the right kinds of strategies to help support us. And then we also can use it to as the baseline to measure cognitive growth from cognitive training. Looks like Barry has raised his hand. And so maybe, Karen, can you chat with people in the chat window and see if they have questions along the way? So I want to just give you a couple of examples of what this looks like when you have a student who's taken a cognitive assessment. And so what this chart is showing is all of those 10 skills that we have been talking about. And starting with the executive functions on the left, attention, working memory, flexible thinking, the 2 memory skills, then the 3 complex reasoning skills, and then visual motor speed and processing speed. So this is a student, this young lady who's about 13 when she took this assessment, and she was struggling with reading. She had a great deal of difficulty with reading comprehension in particular. So it was a few grade levels behind in her reading skills. And what you can see is that, it's what we sometimes call a jagged profile. There's some strengths. Her visual motor speed, she was also a big video game player. And so visual motor speed at the 92nd percentile, but verbal reasoning at the 4th percentile. And so what we're seeing on this graph is, of course, percentile rankings for each of these skills. And like most students, she was comparable to her peers in many those skills that are sort of in that middle of the expected range between those red bars, and significantly better than most of her peers on some things. And verbal reasoning and processing speed were the biggest stumbling blocks for her. And it makes a lot of sense that she might be struggling with reading comprehension, given that. Here's a very different kind of a student. Really struggled a lot with learning, as you can imagine when you look at his executive functions, attention, working memory, flexible thinking. The working memory was not the 0th percentile, it was an invalid score, is what this is representing. But an invalid score on this kind of a test often means that it was very challenging for the student, although there can be other reasons. But in this case, in discussion with the parents, it became very clear that working memory was something that was difficult for him. So that would include things like, losing track of your thinking when you're reading, losing track of where you are in a multi-step process, being asked to do, getting 2 or 3 instructions and forgetting what the second and third are by the time you've gotten halfway through the first. Great difficulty committing information to memory, and but some reasonably good thinking skills, reasoning skills. So the kind of student that we would believe would really benefit from cognitive training to strengthen those executive functions and memory skills, and then let him really show what he's able to do with his thinking. So now I'm going to take all 109 students. So those 2 students were part of this 109. It's a little over half boys, ages 8 to 16 in this particular group. And what you can see is that if we take averages of all of the test scores of all of these 109 students, it almost looks like an average student, or what we would conceive of as an average student. All of the skills are within the middle of the expected range on average, except for processing speed, which is a little low. And actually what this was fascinating to look at, because what I realized is that the thing that the skill that many of the students that we work with, the one that they struggle with the most is actually processing speed. And the good news is, of course, that all of these skills can be built up. But of course, as I showed you in those first couple of examples, huge variation in skills. And very often we have students who have very strong skills and very weak. So what this chart does is look at each of these. It keeps the blue bar is the average. So we have averages, right in the middle of the expected range. This is the same data from that previous chart for the blue bars. The bar to the left, if there is one, is the lowest score that anybody got. And the yellow bar to the right is the highest score for anybody. So cross all of these skills within this group of 100 students. And actually it was almost the same when it was the first time I did this with like 25 or 30 students, huge variation. And so very often we will have kids with really strong skills in some areas, but really weak in others, and all over the map. So now what I want to do is to say, okay, let's first of all look at what happens when they have gone through cognitive training, the kind of cognitive training that I described earlier. And so what we're looking at now is the averages again. So on average, these 109 students, scored at the 37th percentile for attention on their initial test. After cognitive training, they on average scored at the 52nd percentile for attention. Working memory went on average from the 40th to the 55th percentile. Flexible thinking from the 34th to the 53rd percentile. And you can see that growth, that change for each of these skills across the board, and including improvement in processing speed on average, and an average improvement across all of these skills of 13 percentile points. And that's very typical of what we see in as a result of cognitive training. Now, this is improvement for all of these skills. And remember that some of them were really high and some of them are really low. And so if you've got a student who's scoring at the 95th percentile in a skill, you can't see 13 percentile points of improvement. And you're certainly not going to see as much improvement with skills that are already as strong. So Before I do that, I just want to give you the example of the couple of students that I shared with you before in terms of their cognitive growth. This is that first student who struggled a lot with verbal reasoning and processing speed. You can see her change 12 percentile points in processing speed up to the 41st percentile in verbal reasoning. This is an extremely bright and very capable student scoring at the 99th percentile for abstract reasoning. In fact, she just soared academically and had a lot more confidence following her training, as did this other student. And you can see the kind of impact on attention here, flexible thinking, his memory skills, and really allowing him then to show what he's capable of doing in terms of his reasoning and his ability to express what he's able to learn. Now, while working memory is still a weakness, we can now focus supports on that weakness and really help him be much more successful as a learner and in any kind of academic setting and also in life. So then we said, okay, well, we know that some of those high scores are not going to get strengthened. What did we look at the weakest scores? What if we look at the scores for any student who had a score below in the bottom third, basically, so below that middle of the expected range, so below the 32nd percentile. And not surprisingly, because these are the stumbling blocks for various children in this sample, and the reason that they were struggling academically, and the reason, of course, that their parents were interested in having them participate in a cognitive training program. So for these students, if they had a weakness in attention, they were scoring on average at the 9th percentile. If they had a weakness in working memory, they were scoring on average at the 10th percentile. And you can see that across the board. So any of these areas can be true stumbling blocks for children that are having difficulty in school. And sometimes you'll have more than one, as we saw with that the young man whose profile I showed you, who had weaknesses in both visual and verbal memory. So now we're going to take a look at what happened after their cognitive training. And what you can see here is the kind of impact on attention. So if these students had weakness in attention and started the 9th percentile, afterwards, they were on average scoring at the 48th percentile for attention, right smack in the middle of what you would expect for their peer groups. And this is measuring them against their peers, not against everybody in the world, but against children their age and gender. And you can see that across the board. Processing speed was very low for many of these children. Afterwards, performing on average at the 28th percentile. So significant growth there, although not getting quite up, but getting very close to that middle of the expected range. So an average improvement for these really weak skills of 27 percentile points. So let's just think about what it would be like to take your weakest skill or your child's weakest skill or your student's weakest skill and help them develop it to the point that they now can use that skill. When it isn't a stumbling block, they can demonstrate what they're able to do academically in areas where they're already strong. And we'll also probably strengthen some of those strong skills. We certainly see that, as you saw from that previous chart looking at the overall averages. But this is the kind of impact we can have on scores when these are really the areas that are the weakest for these students. This is another way of expressing the same information. And what it does is each student has 10 skills that are measured. So those 3 executive functions, the 2 memory skills, the 3 reasoning skills, and the 2 speed skills. So out of those 10, we can determine for each student how many of those skills they had in that strength range in the top 5% of the population. Is it really exceptional, gifted, if you will? Then we can look at that next tier down, and we can look at the middle of the expected range, the middle of the expected range, and the weakness range. And so what this shows us is the number of skills on average that students had before and after cognitive training. So the number of skills basically in this top 5%, which is like the gifted range, doubled, more than doubled. That's the strength range. Again, if you put those together, they now have on average twice as many skills, almost 2, very close on average, 2 of those skills that are in that strength range. That's really going to empower kids to learn very much more effectively, and really to capitalize on some strengths. Many more in the expected range, and the number of weaknesses basically cut in half. So those skills that we've moved up into the expected range, or even sometimes into the strength range, are now skills that are just there for them. They just happen. They don't have to think about, how do I pay attention? How do I process faster? How do I hold more information in my mind? Or what can I do if I can't? Basically, those skills are now there for them, and learning is simply easier. So, want to just take a moment here and see. One of the questions was, why did I'm going to go back to slides, educator. The slides are very zoomed in. That must be your screen. Okay. Oh, that got someone having a question. We know that these tests are given, like every test, if you're an educator or your mom, even, or dad, you know what it's like when your child goes and takes a test. It's one day in their life. It's one moment in their life. And so we do expect there to be some ups and downs. Sometimes we see that they work more quickly and sacrifice some, I can't remember if that was the case for this student. And sometimes it looks like a decrease, but it's really not a significant decrease. And so we have to take all of that into consideration. But we look very closely at that and discuss that with the parent. And sometimes if it's, we might want to retest sometime later if we think it's not representative. In general, when we see gains like that, we might see. The other thing is, another reason I'd like to show this is if I showed you data for students who were absolutely textbook picture perfect, that's not reality. And so we see some improvements in terms of performance. We see a lot of gains, and those connect with and correlate with the feedback from parents in terms of their children's ability to engage and really thrive in an academic setting. So the assessment, Anne, is one that you all are familiar with at Glenwood Academy, which is called MindPrint. MindPrint came from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. It's scientifically valid, nationally normed, so it compares everybody's performance to their peer group. It's appropriate for ages 8 and up. And so, I don't know if, Anne, knowing that, maybe you want to comment a little bit on how valuable the information is and how it can be used to help students. but Anne could certainly talk to that from her experience. All right. Any other? Looks like we might have some questions. Son is 17. So we have worked with individuals generally from age 6, sometimes 5, but we mostly don't recommend cognitive training below age 6. And then up through, I always like to say from 6 to 106. So we have worked with a lot of adults. With teenagers, obviously, we want to make sure that they bought in. When our children are young, we can pretty much get them to do most things if we really want them to do it. When they get to those teenage years, if they're not going to buy in and engage in the process, it's going to be more difficult. There are lots of conversations we can have and ways that we can help you talk about it, but that would be something to consider. But we've had seen some incredible results. We had one young man who was 24 who went through the program and just really recognized how different his learning was afterwards. And in fact, he had a lot of struggles. He was never able to do, prior to working in brainware, he had never been able to do division and multiplication. He always just avoided it as much as possible. And one time, day after he completed his cognitive training, he called his mom up, but he said, "Mom," he was at the grocery store buying something for her, and he said, "So if I divide 3 into 12, is the answer 4?" She said, and this actually, you can listen to this on our website too. She said, "Yes, Joseph, why are you asking?" He said, "Because it just made sense to me all of a sudden. I just got it. It all fits together." And is there an adult version of your program? We are for 6 to 106. So the program is the same. It can be used by really any age. I think those are good questions. So I wanted to give you a couple of other opportunities for anybody who might be interested. And because I know we have a mixture, people might want to talk to us as a parent. So if you do have a parent, if you do have a parent, we all have parents, don't we? If you are a parent and would like to discuss your child with one of our learning advisors, you can use that link, mybrainware.com/schedule, or you can use that QR code to the right. If you are interested in looking at this as part of a school experience and the impact that it can have on students and their school success, we welcome you scheduling a time to do that. We also just published a book this year, which we're very excited about. It's called Your Child Learns Differently, Now What? And if you want more information on that, you can use that third QR code. So I got a little QR code crazy putting this presentation together, but hopefully that's something. And if there's anything else the difference between working memory and abstract reasoning. Okay, so working memory is the ability to hold information. So it doesn't necessarily involve reasoning, although it can. One of the things that we do. Basically, working memory is our conscious processing. So if you think about what's happening when you're reading, you're taking in pieces of information, holding them in your mind while you think about them and compare them to what you already know. That's working memory. Working memory is how you keep track if you stop and ask for directions. Turn right at the first street, go 2 blocks, turn left at the stop sign, continue on down past the church, and then you're whatever. Of course, we now have our GPS systems, but you still might ask for directions. holding that in your mind while you do that is working memory. So, and then abstract reasoning, we don't have to actually hold anything in working memory necessarily. We might be looking at it. So we might see a pattern. We might see so the way that it's tested is you will see a series of images where each one changes a little bit from one to the next one, and then you figure out what's next, or visual similarities and differences, those kinds of things. Is just nonverbal reasoning. I hope that's helpful. And I'm just checking to see if there are any we've answered those questions and answered that. And if none of those QR codes is really what you want, and you have some other question or something else you'd like to talk about, here's my contact information, and I would be delighted to hear from anybody and continue the discussion. So we'll give you another chance to ask any questions that you might have. And I planned for 45 minutes, and it looks like I'm at 44, so that's pretty good. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. It's exciting to be able to share these kinds of results with others, and just would love to continue to have conversations with everybody. And I know I'm going to be seeing Anne in a month or so. In fact, I think, Anne, we need to plan a professional development day. So I'll give you a call, or you can give me a call. All right. Thanks, everybody. Once again, the recording will be available tomorrow. We'll post it on our website, and everybody who registered will automatically get an email with a link to the recording. If you feel, certainly feel free to share it with anybody, or you can use it to watch it again if there was something you wanted to review. Once again, a pleasure to have you all here. Really appreciate your joining us, and I hope everybody has a fantastic day.